Army thugs, an interesting topic that's been in zeitgeist recently, and it's something that's always rested close to my heart because it's something that kind of dragged me into the game is the whole idea of thugs and super combats. And Army thugs somehow ended up being the one that I used the most in a lot of my early gameplay. In fact, I had a video on the topic over a year ago that I had to scrap because I was shit at making videos and shit at playing the game. And now I'm still shit at playing the game, but I'm a little bit better at making videos. So in this case, of course, the focus is Army thugs, and I think the best way to start any quick overview, hopefully quick, is to talk about what they are, and that's normal thugs and SCs. Now, here are just some examples I whipped up in like 10 seconds of, let's just call it a light super combat. Of course, it's weak to certain weapons, but it's still a light super combat against an unprepared army. It should be able to handily clear them, as well as an infinite quantity of PD. However, this should never be considered an army thug, even if it's put in an army for one reason or another. The reasoning for this is because if it can clear the army you're fighting alone, then it's no longer an army thug, it's a super combatant, and you should be bringing the army along. And if it can't fight the army alone and you're mixing it in, it's often a lot more efficient to put something specially built within that army that's less expensive, serves its purpose that you're going for better, than it is to just take something that you've built to operate alone and slotting it into an army. Similar situation with the Bakamuna Sorcerer Thug. So, it's just a thing, take PD, maybe light stacks. But this isn't something you generally want to put in an army if it's not built for it or if the situation doesn't really call for it. Because in an army, it'll often do the same thing that army thugs can do with cheaper chassis or cheaper equipment, depending on whichever role you envision it playing, but it loses to the same stuff often. Lightning bolt, etc., etc. Thugs and super commands are a very fine line, and because of the gem investiture, you really shouldn't be putting these in situations where they'll easily come into harm's way, especially when you put so many gems of gear in it, so many gems to summon or gold to recruit. And army thugs are putting them in the most harmful environment, which is an army v army fight, on a chassis that's ultimately, hopefully, reasonably cheap and reasonably lightly geared. Therefore, the loss, if you don't pick up the gear, which I'll get into in a little bit, is a lot smaller. Now, army thugs can serve a variety of purposes. There's really three primary ones, though, and those are dealing damage, taking damage, and helping their allies around them. So dealing damage, you got the classic, you got Coral Blades, you got GSSs, you have Frostbrands, and these are just putting them into your army and scripting them and scripting their point buffers, which is a key part of using army thugs, is that you're just trying to deal damage to the enemy troops or enemy thugs and SCs, just some opposing part of the force. Now, then there's the helping allies around them, and that's a bit of a broad and a little bit of a misnomer because it really is like your aura troops, the troops that are doing stuff without attacking. So, of course, you have your eye shields, right? For your eye vengeance, you have your vine shields, but you also have stuff like Hedora, Chillora, Fear, Fire and Astral Shield. The opponent's using a lot of Swarm. You put a Fire Shield army thug in the middle, you give it some point buffs, and you try to bait all the Swarm into it. And, of course, they roast themselves. And then there's Distraction, or tankiness, defense. Now, these are, I think, the hardest to build, especially because normally you build your aggressive army thugs. If they're filling a frontline role against the enemy infantry or elites, you build them to be a little bit tankier, but these are solely designed to tank. Like the Coral Blade, for example, in this build, instead of being used for its draw bleed like the other build, it's actually being used for its bonus HP. This one has a specific resistance built for whatever enemy you're facing, and it flies to the back line, so their mages will use their off-path spells to attack it. Now, here is an example fight. It's quite hasty, not my best work. However, it's an example of where you can just see the power army thugs have. Now, there's a variety in this army. You've got your basic damage ones, you have your eye shield ones that are doing eye vengeance, you have, I believe, a vine shield over here. Yep, a vine shield one to mix into the front line. In the back, you have a flying one to hit the rear. And you'll see in this battle where, to be fair, the gold investment is higher on this side, but it demonstrates just the sheer power they can have in a situation where they excel at. They're fighting Blessed Sacreds with a pretty decent Rainbow Plus, but when they do their rolls with all their buffs, they're able to a bonus advantage. You'll appear, normally these Furbolg are, and as you can see they're actually attacking into the flank. However, this guy is able to do a lot of damage per turn, and you can see he's sleeping someone, he's hitting someone, to kind of freeze the enemy advance on this flank. Over here, it's a similar example. You can see this guy with his eye shield. He might not be getting attacked right now, so he might not be actually using the eye shield for its effectiveness, which is just poor scripting on my part. But he is taking part in the combat. He's sleeping stuff around him, and as you'll see as the fight goes on, he's hitting him with his life drain, his claw. He's still helping the combat engagement. Same thing on this flank. You can see these guys are just kind of using their weapons in there, plus with the support of troops, to clear out what's in front of them. And that's one thing you'll notice with a lot of army thugs is if you send these builds alone, like just this, it's not going to do anything. Like, it's not going to win a fight. It probably can't clear PD, even with point buffs. But when you mix it in with troops and other thugs, you run into a situation where they're not falling to harassment, they're not fatiguing out, so you get a much higher effectiveness from them. Now I'll let this one. You'll see throughout it is they kind of, wherever the army thugs are where the shooting on the. As you can see over here, they're still pushing. Over here, you can see this guy aims at the rear. And the caster in this case is casting Purifying Wind. He can't actually cast his air spells. And over here, you can see this flank is kind of just breaking through the thugs that realistically are doing a lot of the damage. Now, these are all fresh. They're all running 6, 7 kills in melee. And they're actually growing in HP specifically because of how good the chassis is. 46 max HP, 26, stuff like that. Now there are some mistakes in here because of course the research isn't perfectly accurate on the rotation. It's just an example where you could see of like a bunch of army thugs doing different purposes, carrying a lot of the heavy lifting in this fight. In this case, you see 57 kills from the 12 shooting doji. And this doesn't actually show it here, but I can for a moment. But another nice advantage of army thugs is they will often either be the ones to leave a fight, or they'll be the ones to rout. Now, what that means is, in a situation where you're losing a fight using a bunch of army thugs, then you will often have the army thugs be the troops that do escape and the commanders that do escape. And because they're commanders, they'll keep their gear. And if you're winning a fight where you lose a bunch of them, then you will often have the benefit that they are giving you their gear because you have a bunch of commanders on the field because you're using army thugs. I don't know if you win this, but you should have Oh shit, shoot does just carry. Okay, yeah, that kind of showed how good they can be, even without point buffs. But in this situation, yeah, here you can see all the shooting doji that do retreat successfully because they're commanders, and they have very good retreat odds because of that. And that's just some of the purposes of army thugs. Now here's a couple of examples of other chassis you can use. That's really all there is to it. It's just about taking a commander, like in this case, this is a commander where you give him a bless, taking attack, strength, defense, and you stick it in the front line, and he gives your front line some bite that it wouldn't normally have. Or here's one that you use against chaff. Take this guy, he has a good chunk of HP, he has fire shield, you mix him into your front line, and all the chaff will be attacking him and getting burnt, and he'll be freezing enemies around him. Of course, on Iryu, there's the other examples. You have the eye shield, where you can mix something like this into your front line and blind enemies around him, and then you have the more damage-focused stuff, where you could give him a Frostbrand, or you give him a Stone Bird and keep his base gear. Or, of course, the good old classic GSS with its AP and really high stat bonuses. It's just all about taking commanders of different kinds, and that's a key part. It doesn't just have to be mages. It doesn't just have to be specific chassis. It's just taking a commander and fitting them into the army in a way where they can complete their purpose and get value out of your gems. Either dealing damage, tanking, or providing aura effects to your troop lineup. And through using this, you can make armies that are actually a lot less gem reliant as well, because when you're casting point buffs, etc., it doesn't take gems. And these can behave in ways similar to elementals or other tools that you normally use with gems. And this is a quick video on army thugs. I don't know if this will see the light of day. I'm going to send it to HP and he's going to shit talk it. But yeah, it's a thing.